get into that later, is the idea that everyone who's doing jiu-jitsu or judo or anything for that matter is doing it with their body. And this is something that people often, it seems obvious, but people don't appreciate what I'm saying. Like if you're doing jiu-jitsu, he's doing jiu-jitsu with his meat wagon, right? So the mark meat wagon is what is about to apply the jiu-jitsu. So you can't separate that, which is I think what happens in a lot of clubs now, where you just have 100 people and you just start teaching. But the idea that you have to teach to your client based on their abilities.
Yeah, and I think as it pertains to what you do, and this is what I try and get through to my students, is how can you control someone else if you can't actually control yourself?
Brilliant.
So, for example, like last week I was teaching kids gymnastics. And I know some of the parents might be watching the class and they're going, well, this is not martial arts. But to me, it's everything. Because if you can't do a bridge and you can't do a handstand and you can't do these, if you can't control your body, your own self, I can't expect you to be able to control somebody else. And the same thing with adults, and I'll translate into adults and I'll say, listen, there's not a single black belt that can't do this gymnastics. They can all do this stuff to varying degrees of effectiveness. But I feel like on the journey to black belt, a lot of it is balancing the strength with the flexibility or the functional range, and really knowing your physical strengths and limitations and working on them over time. But if you look at a white belt coming in who's stiff, who might be overweight, who may be inflexible, they all have, like, if you look at like a chart, it's like up and down, different strengths and weaknesses, like a character in a video game. And the key is to get everything up. But I feel like jiu-jitsu is a vehicle to work on that. You know, like I have guys working towards their black belt now, and they all have things that they need to specifically work on. I have one guy who's physically not super strong, so he's doing strength training. I have another guy who needs to work on his range, so he's working on his range. And I feel like as you get deeper into the belt system, that stuff becomes more apparent in order for you to survive. You have to have a good level of self-awareness in terms of your strengths and limitations. And that's why I really think like the FRC stuff is great for that kind of stuff.
I was going to say that, as you know, my kids they started in Muay Thai Jiu-Jitsu, and now they've transitioned into wrestling. And that's something.
So we've lost them?
Well, no. Well,
oh man,
they'll be returning. But I wanted to put them in because if I was going to say that, let's not take your club because I know your club runs very similar. But in a lot of clubs, what I think maybe jiu-jitsu has been lacking, and you have to correct me, of course, is the training of the skill. So it seems to me, and I've studied with you for a long time, but I've studied with other people all around the world, kind of, and it seems to me like a lot of clubs, it's like, come in, learn a technique, and let's all get to rolling. Whereas in wrestling, it seems like
drilling. It's
drilling, right? It's like, how many doubles have you shot? Wrestler has shot all of them. Like, it's like we get into the class and they're like, you know, start running, and 20 shots and 20 sprawls and do it again and more push-ups and run and more push-ups and gymnastics and that kind of stuff. And
that's because I feel like wrestling is very competition oriented.
Yes.
And if you want to compete, you have to rep. And it was the same thing with judo. We would do uchikomi and nagekomi. You would I still do this with my classes, but more so with the kids. The adults, it depends on what we're focusing on. If you want to get good at a specific thing, your body has to rep it such that it becomes mechanized. And I explained to the kids, for example, like when you're doing the reps of a takedown, the same way with judo. I said, each rep has to look identical to the previous rep, because your body has to be able to press a button or pull a trigger, and you have to be able to do it reflexively under stress. And the only way to do that, because takedowns are a big movement, it's not a jab, it's not a cross. Your whole body has to turn in, it has to move another body. The only way to do that under pressure, especially when the window of opportunity in a fight is so small, the timing has to be so perfect, is to have repped it hundreds, if not thousands of times. And that's important.
That's okay. So in my terminology, what you're saying is you need to create a pattern, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we'll say. Like when you're repping an arm bar, you're repping whatever, you're creating, the instructor, you're confining the variables of a movement, and you're implying your confinements into your student. So you're saying this is what an arm bar looks like, and this is how to execute. And you said something interesting. You have to rep it the same way every time. So now Mark gets down and he has to start repping this arm bar. But getting back to what we said before, his ability to take that instruction and execute and learn is going to be dependent, like you said, on his internal environment. And that's what I think people are missing. You can have the best instructor in the world, you and your brain can have the best pattern, but if his body is unable to execute, or if his body is broken, so to speak, and the body doesn't speak to the brain as well as it should, it's going to be difficult to make the pattern that you're asking for.